This episode of the School of Laughs podcast is brought to you by Patreon supporter K. Dodd Stokes. If you'd like to learn how you can sponsor the podcast through a small recurring monthly donation through Patreon, visit schooloflaughs.com/Patreon. And also, this week we're proud to announce we're sponsored by Funny and Amen. You know, comics, in order to reach a bigger audience, you need partners. And when it comes to a video partner, you have to partner with funnyandAmen.com. Funny and Amen has over 20 years experience producing, directing, and shooting feature films, commercials, and live recordings, and now is producing clean comedy content. I was up in Philadelphia recently, and the team at Funny and Amen came out, taped the entire show, and now I've got some clips that are the best clips, the most recent clips, the clearest, the sharpest, the best video I've ever had to promote my comedy. So check out the work of Kevin Hackenberg and his team at funnyandamen.com. That's funny, A-N-D, amen.com.
Welcome to the School of Laughs podcast, brought to you by schooloflaughs.com. Whether you're an aspiring comedian, a part-time pro, or a speaker who wants to become funnier, this is the podcast for you. We'll break down tools, tips, and techniques to help you get bigger, better, and more bookable. And now, here's the show.
Hey guys, Rick Roberts here, back with another episode. In case you're kind of wondering what's going on, we are bi-monthly now. Every other week an episode comes out, mainly so I can take that off week to help write a couple of comedy books that I want to provide to you guys based on not only the podcast, but my 25 years of stand-up experience. So thank you for being patient. Writing a book is new, and it does require a lot of time, as does the podcast. So I'm kind of splitting it up every other week. And this week is our final look back at 2016. I'm joined in the studio this time with Jonnie W. and Brian Bates, both former students, both full-time comics now. And we talk about last year, some of the lessons we learned. Sometimes we learn them the hard way. Other times we just kind of notice what's working and what's not, and we make those changes for the new year. So Brian and Jonnie both were very honest and very selfless by telling me 3 mistakes each that they made, or 3 things they want to change for the new year. I also offer up 3 things that I've learned in the past year that I will tweak and change for the upcoming year. So I tell you what, let's just go ahead and jump right into this week's podcast. And again, I'm joined by former students Brian Bates and Jonnie W. One thing that still amazes me, isn't as easy as it should be, is that I need to triple check with the people when I book a gig to make sure everything's going to be the way it should be. And I send out these advanced pre-event questionnaires to find out as much as I can about the layout and the attendees and all these things. And from that, I kind of troubleshoot what they might not know that they should be doing. And then I call them and we discuss it, and everything from the sound system to don't be serving food during the comedy. And if it's after the meal, make sure all the plates are cleared and tell the waitstaff you're done for an hour. And even just last week, I went through all that with the client, and then they said, so were you bringing your own sound system, or we were supposed to provide it?
Oh, no.
And I'm like, that's in the contract, and we talked about it 6 weeks ago. It's you guys are responsible for that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, what do we need? I'm like, well, if you get out the contract, it's right there, So, and I totally expected that to be taken care of because she said yes 6 weeks ago. And so she's just slipped her mind. And so luckily I caught that before showing up to the ballroom at the Marriott, and then there's nothing there. And then I just got to yell.
Was that here in Nashville?
No, it was up in Indianapolis. And, but she was cool and got me in. I said, this is the thing that I learned primarily is I need to contact the AV person specifically, even after the client contact has said it's all okay, because.
Is the client often a human resource person who's maybe scheduling it but doesn't really understand what you mean?
Yeah, often it's somebody that's once a year they're in charge of putting on the party, and so they just kind of get the comedian lined up and assume everything's going to be fine. So it's not like in their wheelhouse to be knowing all these things. Yeah. And I don't like to be heavy-handed, or I don't want to be the extra email they have to answer all the time, but I do want to make sure it goes right.
Yeah.
And so the one thing that I've learned going forward is even on things where I've over-communicated, to over-communicate one more time. That's kind of the theme for this year, is make sure everybody's super on board to where they know it as well or better than I do at that point. So there's no surprises and things go well.
I have somebody that helps advance my shows, but even giving her the right tools, because she was saying, well, I'm getting these questions or whatever. Is this available? some things because I have some video and audio elements in my show, some cues, and even pre-show music. Like I'll do some venues where they'll put on really stiff, awful music, and then you're supposed to, I want it to be higher energy, even if it's instrumental. So I made a playlist of that kind of stuff, and I put it all on this page on my website, and it's just a hidden URL on my site that I send out, and it says jonniew.com/tech, and I say, email this to your tech person, and it has my email. They can email me back with it, but it has all that stuff, and it's just laid out, and it's laid out even kind of in a fun way. There's gags on that page even to where it's like very light, but it's very like, this is what we need to do. It's helped a lot, but like you said, sometimes you get there and you've not triple checked, and so there's gaps there. It can affect the show for sure.
And it, just upset stress level if you discover it there for them and you.
Yeah. And like you said, when you get there and you have a list on your site. I've kind of borrowed some of your stuff, the 10 tips to a great event, and I put that out there. I use some of my own that are adapted because I had to do a little bit different show than you. But I've noticed that like if they can get 6 or 7 of those, it's still, you have a good chance. Yeah. But people don't remember, and the reason we have to fight for the show elements is because people do not remember in the audience that, oh, wow, they kept the lights hot on the audience, or, wow, there was only the speakers were in the ceiling and it was rough. Yeah. All they remember is, man, that guy struggled. That's all they remember. Right. They only remember you struggling.
Yeah. And sometimes, all that said, you still think you can power through it.
Oh, yeah. What's the comedian in you?
And I had a different Christmas party in December where I'd worked for the same company at a different location last year. But this time, and last year was set up just fine.
Yeah.
This year, it's even more intimate, but it's super bright lights. Mm-hmm. And like they were almost afraid to laugh because, I like it in the middle, but there was no way to dim this. It was either all dark, which means I was going to be dark too, or super bright. And I thought, well, I can do it. But it really affected the show. Bates, what were you thinking?
Well, I mostly do clubs, so that doesn't quite apply because it's a comedy club. But so what was the lesson you learned? You reach out to the audio video guy. Anybody else in particular that...
Well, if they've had a comic in the past, I'll reach out to them to see what was provided already.
Because you'd reach out to the comic themselves?
Yeah.
And you usually know who they are?
Sometimes, if I know them for like there's an event coming up in February, and the advance sheet said who we had here before, and it's through an agency, but they had listed 2 out of 3 comics I knew already. So I called them and said, hey, I'm going to perform for this group. Anything I should know about it ahead of time? Yeah. And so that's helpful. But the overall thing I learned from that is just don't assume, even though you've covered it twice, that it's going to be right on the day of the show.
Okay, gotcha.
Well, as far as being able to reach out to other comics, that's a good lesson in and of itself, to not estrange yourself from the community of comics, because you need each other. Because sometimes all these gigs come back around. We all do the same work. Eventually, they're going to call you on that list. And if you don't know anybody else on that list, you can call and be like, is this good? Is this weird? Are they tight? Is there anything in my show that you wouldn't do? Like, those are good questions to ask somebody.
Absolutely. And all the comics are happy to fill you in. They want the gig to go good enough that it comes back around to them again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Brian, what was one of the things you learned from, and this was your second full year in comedy.
Yep.
For people that may not have heard Brian on the previous podcast. 2 years at it now, what was something that was like a little higher on your radar this time around?
Well, as far as a lesson learned, this year I put out a CD and my first album, and I would say overall it went great, but I would say think big if you're going to do something like this. And I wasn't. It turned out great, but initially I wasn't thinking as broad as I should
in terms of
the overall package. What I could have done with that special night. So I got a headline weekend. Not a weekend at Zany's, but a night at Zany's. And I thought, you know what? I should try to record a CD. In hindsight, it went so well, and I got so many people, and you were there. It was such a good, fun night. I wish I'd had somebody shot it for a DVD.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, because a good video, can go so far. Even if I didn't sell it, even just a good video to put on a website or for promotional reasons. But a DVD, you were there. It would have been a good enough night to do a DVD.
It was a phenomenal audience.
Yeah, it was such a great audience, and it was better than I ever imagined. But I should have been imagined. I should have thinking, that way. I did do it as a CD, but if I had to do it again, I would have brought in, professional audio guys with multiple mics to put around the room, and just to make it that much better. So, from the initial time I first had it in my head to the actual night, I was thinking differently. If I'd have thought bigger from the get go, it would have probably I could have gotten so much more out of it.
Yeah, even just a couple of cameras in there, a straight ahead, maybe one to the side or something. And you'd have also had 2 extra microphones from those cameras to mix with.
Yep.
But yeah, the miking the crowd is so that's something you can't overdo.
Yeah.
I mean, you can always delete 16 of the 18 mics if you got 18 mics, but if you only have one, everybody's got to be laughing the right way. And you had what, 2 or 3 max in the room?
Mics.
You had the board. Then where did you have? There was one on the stage, right?
Well, yeah, the stage mic, and then there were some mics that were set up, a couple set up around the room, and they didn't pick up as well as I would have liked.
No, because the audience, I was there. The audience was big laughs.
Yeah.
And the CD you can hear, but the level of laughs never reached 9 on the CD. It was like 2 is where the maxed out, even though it was a 10 in the crowd.
Yeah, yeah, and I had set up my video camera in the balcony, and thankfully I did that because I got us another audio track that we pulled off and used for that to make the CD better. But just generally speaking, I guess just learn if you're going to do something like this and be ambitious, have confidence in it, and go for it.
That's cool. And the CD did turn out good. You had some.
Yeah, I love it.
The mastering ninja on the back end of it to help you out.
Yeah.
Very good. Johnny, what was one of the things you picked up this year?
Well, part of the thing is at the end of the year, like I gained some weight, and I have a yo-yo weight anyway. Like I gain and lose the same 40 pounds again and again and again in my adult life. But it really, like I'm a very low energy performer. So it doesn't affect me like an act out comic would, like where I go, wow, I'm out of breath because I did X, Y, Z. I got to watch this. But I noticed by the end of the year, as I was getting bigger, it was affecting my confidence on stage. And I was developing new tics. We've talked about tics before in your class. As soon as you get rid of one comes in, and you start shifting the microphone like a gear shift. Or there's 5 or 6 that all comics have to face. But then I had a new one where I was tugging at my shirt. My wife noticed that I was doing a show, and she kept saying, "You keep pulling at your shirt." And I think it was because I felt like my shirt was riding up because I raised my arm sometimes above my head, and I think I felt like my shirt was getting caught on my belly. I was like, I don't want to show this front row of my belly or whatever. Right. So I kept pulling at my shirt to make sure it was. She goes, "Your shirt's not riding up. Like you just look weird." And I was like, "Oh no." Well, again, so it's just I don't come from comedy. I didn't come to comedy from a super confident position. I came at it from this like self-deprecating place, and I had music in my show, so I felt like that was a way in. I could hide behind XYZ or whatever, the guitar, and then I started developing real confidence. But really, I put on the confidence almost like it's a coat. I put it on, and I go out. That's my stage thing. It's a little bit bigger. It's an amplified version of my personality by 20% maybe. But yeah, when you add 40 pounds, you start feeling sluggish and you just feel less yourself, and all eyes are on you. That's the thing about comedy that's so different from any other thing is it's all you and there's nowhere to hide. And so if you feel out of shape and out of sorts, it can affect even the delivery of something that you've said 100 times. Right. So I noticed it was starting to happen, and I was like, I got to clean this up. So I'm doing this thing. I was such a junk food junkie from on the road. You always have an excuse. So I started trying to clean it up a little bit, and I've been doing this low carb thing and trying to get off sugar. I've not had sugar in over 2 weeks now.
I can't even imagine that.
So I was a big bread guy, so I've not eaten any bread. I'm trying to, and I won't be able to maintain it forever, but it's just one of those things like I feel like I needed that jump start. That was something but when it started bleeding the performance, because you're always like, well, if I can do the shows, it doesn't matter. Right. People don't laugh at me because I'm handsome. Like they laugh at me because my material's good. But when it affects the way you deliver it and the way you feel, then I was like, I got to make a switch. So it was good. It was a good thing to get a hold of, I think. I caught it right. I'm backing away from the ledge now in the nick of time, I think. So.
Well, that's good that you caught it. And, it's really hard to stay healthy as far as eating and stuff on the road.
The one upset I saw, though, that joke about you doing sit-ups in school really took off. Fatter you got.
That's true. So. There are some jokes that I do that I think, are more relatable, but it's almost like Gaffigan. Gaffigan's not really fat by American standards, but he's doughy enough. And everybody in the audience, even the skinniest person in your audience has food issues if you're an American. So he's always able to land with whatever food joke, laying around eating ice cream in bed or eating bacon all day. It always lands because I don't think there will be a time when I can't make some of my food material land. But there are some jokes that land harder if they look relatable. Like, oh, this guy, he did just eat a gallon of ice cream.
He still got the spoon in his hand.
That's right.
Look at me, you and Rick. It's like the evolution of man here.
It is, I'm telling you.
Well, thanks for being honest with that, because that is a tricky one. And yeah, especially, you caught it at the end of the year where if you're like me and most clean comics, you're busier than the rest of the year. So you have less time to be home eating right and on your regular schedule. So it's a good thing you caught it now where you had a little time to clean it up. So very cool. Well, that kind of leads me into my second thing I learned this past year was to have better balance between the things that I do that bring money into the home. So, at the very end of the year, I kind of go back and look at where my different income resources came in. And in my mind, mentally, I thought that my speeches were bringing in way more than the percentage that they were. Whereas really my comedy is still nearly 75% of all my income, hitting the stage and doing stand-up, or maybe an event where I have a little Barney Fife before I do my stand-up. So I think that I need to either embrace my stand-up more and push that harder and maybe downplay the speeches on my website a little bit more, or maybe just have a separate website for it. Because as you can see there, I'm showing these guys a chart. 75% is hitting the stage doing my comedy. And then also in this little chart, the School of Laughs is less than 12% of my income. And that's never been a goal for it to be 100%. It's maybe when I retire. Yeah. But the School of Laughs stuff, including the podcast, was eating up big chunks of each week where I could be promoting my own comedy. So that was part of the reason that I backed the podcast down to twice a month. It's much more manageable. There's not one due as soon as I publish one, and it's like I can get the next one up there. I did like the rhythm and pace of talking to comics weekly like that, So even this year when I let the first one not publish, it was like, man, it's almost like I'm on vacation or something. And I spent time last week in here writing, for 4 hours. I got out some notebooks, and I wasn't really able to do that as much last year as I wanted to. So having that balance amongst the offerings that I have between comedy, the speeches, and the School of Laughs, just looking at what it really is, and really, the comedy should be 80%, and the rest of it will be falling into 20. That's the rule of the Pareto principle. But time-wise, it was inverse. I was spending 80% of my time keeping the School of Laughs thing up in the air, podcast to podcast.
The what principle?
Pareto.
What is that?
So 20% of your focused efforts can generate 80% of your results. And inversely, 80% of your unfocused time only generates 20%. So I was flipping it on its ear by spending 80% of my time generating the little 20% that isn't stand-up comedy, when I really should be spending 80% on my comedy and my speeches if I want to put that in there. Yeah. And let the School of Laughs be what it is, but be a smaller percentage of my time.
That's good. Well, that's the thing too. I know you tell this to a lot of people who are starting out, but like the thing I run into a lot with beginners, and I fell into it a little bit, but is that they want to focus on how to get more work before they focus on having a great product. So it's almost like they're trying to get you to show me the secret to trick this person into hiring me before I've even finished what I'm going to do. Right. And so, but we can all fall into that pattern of and two, when you say just the foresight to make a pie chart that says, most comics don't even have that, where let's write down everything I've done and let's put it into a category. And now let's think about how much effort I spend on X, Y, which one, and does that line up? Cause you could fall into this thing of I'm this thing, and you put blinders on. Sure. I'm a speaker. This is how I get, then you look at it and you're like, oh wow. Because people will tell you what you are, even in your audience, the laughs they give you tell you where, but what they hire you for tells you too. And that's the piece that you're getting now. They're hiring me as this. This is who I am. Right. I'm also this, but I'm this.
And mentally, I thought it was almost 60-40 last year. Yeah. 60% stand up, 40% speeches, as far as that mix. And I was way off. And the speeches do well. It just seems like maybe because I prepare a lot more for them, that it was taking more mental time. So I thought I was delivering them more. It was still a good chunk of it, but in relationship to the other categories, it was very small, less than 25%. So that's something I want to do this year is spend 75 or 80% of my time on my stand-up, promoting myself on that, doing all the things I need to do to make that grow. Because that's I mean, that's my bread and butter. It's my 25 years of experience all the way through. And grow my speeches as needed, but maybe not spend as much time worrying about that. Even though I learned things like the Pareto principle by doing the speech. So,
Yeah, who's this Pareto guy? I want to know more about him.
The mafia guy that I remember. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
It's
I
important.
see 80% of the comments coming from Johnny and 20% from Ryan. Ryan, what was another thing that went last year?
All right. One thing I learned is, and this is something we all have to work on, is diversifying it's kind of what you were talking about to some degree, diversifying our comedy to not get so bogged down in things you can't control. And I guess what I mean by that is, and we all can get caught up in like, who's getting stuff that we're not getting, especially when you're a young comedian. And, of course, you're in the corporate world. Johnny's more in the Christian world. I'm more in the club world. But when you're in a town where there's only one comedy club, it's easy to get bitter and worked up about why is this person getting this and that. And you put too much emphasis, in this case, it could be Zanies, on that one particular club. But if you learn to diversify a little bit, where you're generating your comedy income and stuff, then nothing seems so important that you depend on them so much. And I guess that's what I've learned this year, that the more you can get yourself out there in different avenues, whether it be Christian comedy or corporate or whatever, then you don't put so much emphasis, so much pressure on yourself to do any one thing. And you don't get bogged down in when you're not getting stuff from them.
That's true, like the too many eggs in one basket kind of thing. I mean, there was many comics when I was going through the comedy clubs full time that they only worked the funny bones or they only worked the improvs.
Right.
And a couple of those guys had incidents where they got banned from not only the club where they had the incident at, the whole chain dropped them. And then those guys were scrambling.
Right.
So in the business class, we talk about even just your mix of chain clubs plus your mom and pop. So you have a blend of that. So it's going to be rare that 5 mom and pop clubs, single owner clubs, go down the same year. So if you lose one, it's just a small percent. But if something happens with that chain, or another thing that happened a lot of times, the one person who booked all the improvs, or who was your contact to book you in all of them, that person moved on somewhere else, and then all of a sudden you don't have that contact anymore.
Right.
And just their job change cuts you out of 20 weeks of work or whatever it might be. So diversifying and being, like I think you said it best, being more focused on what you can control. Which you can control picking up the phone, you can control talking to old clients, you can control marketing. You can't control the results of those, but you can control making those things happen.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, again, just using Nashville as an example, we have one comedy club. Well, I guess we have 2 now with Third Coast Comedy Club, but Zanies is the one that most people think of. But then there's comics get frustrated about not getting work there, but then they'll never leave the city of Nashville. And what are you going to do? I mean, and then they put so much emphasis on that club that they get disproportionately bogged down and upset when people are getting things. I think it's just a good lesson in life, though. Just anything you do, if you put all your eggs in one basket, then it's just dangerous. You got to diversify your income, anything that you do, because you're going to have dry patches, and then you got to lean on those other things.
And Johnny, are you able to eat eggs on the low carb diet?
I can eat eggs.
Right.
And
so you can keep as many of those eggs in your basket. Give all your eggs to him.
And the bacon. I can eat the bacon. So. No toast. No toast, please. No toast.
What do you drink?
What do I drink?
Yeah.
I can drink, anything but like juice, anything with sugar. I can have diet soda though. I can have like sugar substitute.
But isn't the carb and carbonation carbs or no?
No.
Okay.
Carbohydrate.
So sugar substitute.
I didn't go to college.
It's the.
I did, but I'm not admitting it.
I don't have an Italian word for the principle, but it's
the carburetor principle.
That's right.
Philippe Carbondate.
That's right.
What was another thing you picked up this past year?
Well, you talk about balance a little bit, and you guys are kind of sharing it. But to me, I think I realized this year, I had a pretty busy year, but there was just a lot of clumped together. Like I would have some time off, but then I would have 3 weeks in a row where it felt like I was gone every other day. And I think there's a number of things, be it shows or side projects or things you're involved with, that are outside of your relationship with your wife or your family, that when you get to it, if you're not self-aware enough to know, like, this is my number, it's time to go back one, Mm-hmm. Like Dangerfield that was his whole joke writing thing, is he would go tell a joke and then he would remove a word every night until he didn't get a laugh. Well, it's kind of the same thing. Like you keep, when I first started, you just take everything because you're like, I got to get out there.
Right.
You take every gig. And if you live that way, even as you start getting work, if you just keep that idea that like, we don't turn down work. What if the window closes? Like if you're always living in that thing, then before you know it, you don't recognize your house, or you don't, it's weird. So there was a couple times where I started feeling that way, where it's like, I think I know what my number is now. I think I'm going to do 100 things.
What do you mean by number?
Like the number of shows that I'll take before I start saying, unless this is like some crazy opportunity that I can't turn down.
Or you could even bring your wife along with.
Or I can bring my wife along with, or I can say, hey, I'm going to pass this off to another comic, and being willing to, like, that's the hard part too. Like that's the part of the community too that we don't talk about a lot, is everybody that if you can't do it, like you should have 4 or 5 people on your list that you can go, and then they'll pass things to you, and that's how it should work. But I've started doing more of that, because it's like, I'm not saying like, oh, my calendar's so full, but I'm saying there is a number, and it's not even the same for everybody. I think there are comics who can do whatever. For me, I think it's probably like 90 things. Like if I'm gone, because that means I'm gone probably 150 days if I'm doing 90 events, because you got to count the travel days in. So it's like 150 days a year is probably about right. And my wife travels with me for about 30% of those. 25-30% of those, but she'll pick out which one. San Diego, right? She's with me. Yeah, that's in the. Yeah.
Say? And is that number right?
That's right. Is that number? Yeah, I don't know. Well, she loves her day job, so that's part of it. If she didn't have a day job at all, then she probably would just go and just be with me. But she really likes what she does. So I don't know. I think I'm working on that balance. I think I thought that I would be different in that. I thought, well, I'll just take this work and everything will be great, because my wife's so understanding. It's not that we've had fights about it, but I can sense, you can tell when you're being a bad husband or not, Oh,
sure.
You can tell.
And sometimes, I mean, long time ago, I tried to explain it like you'll never have the perfect work-life balance, because sometimes work gets really, really busy. December's, for example, or what have you. But there's also times in summer maybe where you're home more than you normally are, and you can tell your kids don't need you that much or what have you too. But, one thing I started thinking about 3 or 4 years ago was I want to make sure mentally and physically I book X amount of days with my family each year.
Yeah.
And that leaves days to do comedy, as opposed to putting all the emphasis on I have to have this many comedy dates, and that means I'll probably be home this many days. It's just making sure, and even this past week, the Vanderbilt played Kentucky at home.
Right.
And I could have gone to that game and been home, but I've been home after the kids went to bed, and I would have had to leave, early. So I would have been home the whole day, but not seeing my kids besides maybe in the morning when they got ready for school.
Yeah.
And so I thought, you know what? I can put on the game at 6 o'clock and watch it with my kids. Mm-hmm. And that was better, even though I loved seeing them Kentucky play live, and that was right there in my backyard.
Yeah.
I was just aware that, it's been busy, and I just got back from the road, and it's just early in the year still. I'm like, I'm going to save that day for the family.
Yeah, and honestly, it's not just about like, I don't want to feel bad or like I'm a bad person who's off in Never Never Land and my wife has to go do a real job and like I get to go do this thing that I love. It's not even that. It's about a balance of feeling like a normal life. Like we need to be around normal people. Like if you hang around nothing but comics and comedy club owners and even the events that I do, which are largely conferences and stuff, that has a certain sheen to it and a certain feel to it. And you need to feel like I got to get home and do the laundry. You need to feel that.
Right.
Because otherwise I think your material hurts too. That's why people end up with rental car jokes and airline jokes. It's all they ever see or whatever.
And you got to do that laundry because you're tugging on your shirt.
That's right. They're shrinking up. Shirts are shrinking.
Yeah. So, I mean, you and I have been in about the same amount of time, and I feel like you're probably like me. You take every gig because you're just worried. So I start turning on gigs, they'll go away.
Right.
So you just take everything, and now you're probably getting to the point where you're more confident in your career and comfortable and realize you can turn some down, pick and choose a little bit.
Yeah.
I can't, but you can.
I remember one time I got a gig from a corporate guy, and he said, are you open this date? This was last year, and I said, I'm not. I was so bummed. I was like, I'm busy. I'm not. Are they married to that date? He wrote me back and right. He goes, it's not a bad thing to be busy.
Right.
Like the corporate people that are even booking it, they notice that. Oh, he's working.
Right.
Sometimes they want even more. Well, we're going to get him next year then. We just didn't get him. So sometimes it's good to be busy. No. But I was so bummed out because I was like, they'll never come back. It's like you're trying to get a squirrel to come over to you.
Yeah. I think it's, communicate with them. Like I always, I had a phone call yesterday. There was a conference and I was booked on 3 of the days in 3 different places, but the conference was here in Nashville. And he's like, hey, that's great. He goes, you probably, if you're like me, you probably need to work next year too, right? I'm like, yeah. And I said, do you mind if when I start getting inquiries about January, do you mind if I put my calendar just to give you a call? And he's like, He's like, that's what you should do. He goes, you should be proactive like that. He was an insurance agent. He
Yeah.
goes, if we just waited for people to call us, then our competition's calling those people while we're waiting on calls.
Right.
He goes, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you in October or September, whenever you start getting that January stuff going. Let me know.
Yeah, I remember the first thing I got where they said, well, we're looking at summer of 2000 whatever, and it was a year and a half away. And I hung up and I was so like frustrated. And now I just don't feel that anymore. I feel like, well, I'm going to be a comedian then. I'm still going to be a comedian then. So why? It's almost like it's almost like you thought like, what if I'm not even a comedian by then? You feel like that window.
Well, it's like a weird thing looking at your calendar, whatever the edge of it is for.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I assume there'll be some work there.
That's right. I get to be a comedian all the way to May this year.
As far as I know.
As far as I know.
What's the percentage you guys have found though that you've got kids and but you're both married? That what's the good work-life balance as far as percentage you think?
Well, I just know for me to limit the times I'm gone for 3 days or more at a time. And there's I call them cluster dates. Like you end up getting a Friday, then all of a sudden you got a Thursday, and it's 7,000 miles the other direction.
Yeah.
And then you got to cross over where you were and go Saturday. But there's 3 dates in a row. And in a way, your travel is reduced by staying out because you're not flying home and going back out. So you save money for the family that way. But, 3 with maybe a half day travel day, 3.5, and I try to do that too many times in a month. 12 dates a month is plenty. 8 is fine. Somewhere in there is good, a good mix. But when there are that many in a row, it's tricky. With kids especially, Even my little 4-year-old, the other day we were talking about boats or something. She goes, remember that time you went and did a show on the boat and it was 7 days? You're not doing that again, are you?
Yeah.
And that was a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
But she still remembered it from when she was 2.5.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, your kids are old enough now where they miss you being present in their stuff. So you have to, and then you could always justify, well, I had to pay for all this, but like that only carries so much weight before you're like, no, I need to be more present.
I only use that speech like twice a year. I'm like, you see how the lights are on right now?
That's right.
That's why I have to go do shows. Then I turn off the light and go, this is what it'd be like if I didn't do shows. Good night.
But there's a way to be there even without being there in that way. And so I don't know. I think it's about trying to be a better person too, not just be, because like we're always trying to be, I got to be the funniest. But it's like, well, there's this person who supported you, believed in you when you didn't work, 5 days a year. Right. And so now it's like, I want to make sure I'm still taking care of that and tending to that. So it's good.
This is getting sad to me.
It is. It's
I feel like this podcast should be called, what does Brian also not have in his life?
Yeah, I never thought about it. So single, married, married with 2 kids. Yeah. So it is kind of like a broad range, but we all do the same job.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're all different kind of, you're mainly corporate and I'm club and he's church. And you used to be club and then you got married and then you had kids and you've kind of evolved into a more family-friendly environment.
But if I could have been a single corporate guy earlier, I would have done that now that I know.
Lesson learned from 1988.
Yeah. Then your number would have been whatever they'll give me. 300. I'll do 300 days a year.
Right.
Man.
And for the record, Rick put on Facebook he wanted a Kentucky basketball ticket. No one accepted. So now he's saying, I decided to stay at home with my family.
It's funny, my wife said, you should go. Like, she was encouraging me to go. And she even, like, at 4:30, she goes, here's a lady that's selling tickets for $30 if you want to still go. I'm like,
my wife will do that too. It's a trap.
It is. I just wanted to,
it's a test.
Yeah. There's like a sting agent on the other side. You bought the tickets. You're going to father jail.
It's her, like, disguising her voice.
Well, let's we've all done 2, right? Or did we?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
let's move on to other stuff I can't do.
Let's end on less down and more kind of what we learned that we're going to tweak in a positive way this year as far as the craft of comedy. So, I'll lead off on this segment again. For me, it's just when I do take gigs to try to have an impact besides just making them laugh at the gig. And so that's something I've constantly been aware of for several years. But this year I've been more intentional about the gigs I book and pursue. And by that, I mean whether it's fundraising efforts for a certain organization or if it's a church event, maybe doing something before or after to help them out or raising money for like new missions and church organizations like that kind of help in different parts of the country. But just thinking, even as I'm booking it, is there something else I can do for you besides just the comedy?
Yeah.
But finding little things that I can do to help out. Several times this year, and I think you did the same thing too. There was the hurricane down in Florida. So for the month after that, all my sales, I sent the money to the Red Cross.
Yeah.
And if people wanted to buy a shirt and they're writing a check, just write it to the Red Cross. But I lumped that in.
Right.
And so even my cost of the shirts and everything, I just went. And then we had the fires in Gatlinburg. Did the same thing all December, which is usually a pretty good, but I felt great about at the end of the show saying, hey, I've got a product, and usually I just sell it for me, but let's raise some money for these folks close to home. So
that's great.
So trying to find each gig a way to make it bigger and more lasting than just take the money and run.
Again, I feel bad because I'm usually telling people about the drink special, and but I guess I'm finding out who's celebrating anything tonight. So
I'm celebrating. I'm not in a hurricane or a fire.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Wonderful.
Okay, good. I can keep my CD sales.
You can get Rick's CD in the back. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think whenever the shows that I do where they have a cause attached, or I get to tell them about a cause that I believe in as a part of it, where you're not like hemmed down. Sometimes you're hemmed in by their program and they've decided this is whatever. Don't. But I feel a lot better leaving those shows. I feel more fulfilled, right, as a performer, because I think that's just how we're built. That's how we're wired by God. I think we're supposed to, like, there's a scripture that says that we're his workmanship made for good works that he prepared for us long ago. So I think when we do something good, it's the reason we feel good is because we're literally doing the thing we're made to do. Right. So, but it's so much comedy. It's like, it's all about me and me. Because it's kill or be killed. Like, it's this fight and it's this war. And so you could lose sight sometimes of the fact that, like, this is a vehicle that I could really take somewhere. I could really make a difference with this if you set out to do it. Absolutely.
Yeah. If you're only serving yourself, it's like burying the talent.
Yeah.
And if you go out and multiply that talent for other people, then you're doing what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good.
All right. What are you thinking, either Johnny or Brian, as far as something craft-wise for the year?
Well, I'll one thing, and I know this is it's a obvious given, but I'll tell you why it's especially kind of in my brain right now is Write More, which I know is Comedy 101. But I keep my set list for all my shows. Uh-huh. So I went back this week and looked at a set from January of 2014, January 2015, January 2016, and then what I would do doing now. And this is for a feature set, because that's mainly what I do these days, at clubs, 25, 30-minute set. So in 2014, I'm still doing right now 25% of the jokes I was doing in 2014. I'm still doing 33%, or about a third of the jokes I was doing in 2015. But I'm still doing 75% of them. So 3/4 of my act is the same as it was a year ago. So that's not good. I need to be writing more.
I mean, 25% new material in your set is what you're saying.
From a year ago, yeah.
And I know it's not where you want it to be, but I'll tell you, I bet 90% of the comics listening haven't switched up 25% of their set in the past year.
Maybe. And again, I'm not talking about a full hour. I'm talking about 25, 30-minute set. And obviously I don't have a fan base out there clamoring to, we want the new stuff. I mean, most of the time people have never heard any of this anyway. But why it's so important, I think, is because, for a couple of reasons. One, I noticed at the end of the year, my sets weren't hitting as hard. And I think some of it is because we all get tired of our jokes and it becomes reciting like it's a play and you're not as exciting about them. So you're just kind of saying them and the crowd senses it, even if you can't sense it. Right. I feel like that was part of the reason. I feel like, and you and I have talked about this, I'm transitioning a little bit. I'm becoming a different type of comic. So some of my sets are a little bit uneven as far as the type of comic I am. Right. And therefore that just kind of confuses the audience sometimes. So I'm becoming a different person. So I need to keep on writing to become that new comic. You just get excited about new jokes. And I feel like I need to, they say you can best learn a new language if you're in another country and you have no choice but to do it. So part of me needs to especially the jokes I've been doing for 3 years or more, just don't put them in your set. Uh-huh. And you don't want to bomb, obviously, but I'm not saying give it all up today, but I got to force myself more to write new stuff and just say, you don't have a choice of doing those old jokes. Right. You got to do these new jokes. You got to make them work.
That's good. Yeah. And again, of all the comics I know, you write as much or more than a lot of guys, but it's good to hear you say that you're not satisfied with that.
Well, I feel like I do, but then I feel like I just fall back on those old jokes because they're safety nets almost. Like I do write a lot, but I feel like they don't make it into my final set
Yeah. Well,
to some degree.
That's another thing is like all your new jokes are auditioning to knock somebody else out of your old set.
Yeah.
It needs to be as strong or at least be a gateway to a new topic that is going to be super strong.
Yeah, or even if it's the same topic, then you need to take out one of those old topic jokes. I mean, you're obviously going to still write jokes about your kids, but
Right.
they're going to change. So
yeah, I got to quit doing the diaper genie stuff. But yeah, I did graduate out of that.
And then you talk about hell there, and they're confused. It's like punchline confusion.
Yeah, but it is true. Like in my mind, there's categories of what I talk about.
Yeah.
So mentally, it's one place I start every year. Is like, okay, what are they doing now? So now my kids are. My 4-year-old's saying a lot more instead of just doing stuff, so I can repeat what she's saying and get laughs from it.
I think we all have jokes where, sorry to cut you off, but if you have numbers involved, especially, and I have a lot of numbers in my jokes, it can, if you keep doing it for years, you'll catch yourself. So I think I told you I did a joke recently about going to my 25-year class reunion, and I'd already just got through telling the crowd how I was 45. And I immediately saw in their eyes, they're like, wait a second, this guy was 20 when he graduated high school?
That's in special ed.
And of course, I talked about that. I just take out the 20. I just say, I just went to my class reunion. Right. That's all you got to do. But that first time I did it on stage, I was like, oops.
Yeah.
So if you got numbers involved, you better update your set.
Well, it's tricky. I mean, all last year I was telling people I've been married for 15 years, and that's not going to happen until October of this year.
Yeah, I've done that before.
So, I just in my head, I thought we were.
Yeah.
And so it's just one of those things. And then I've got jokes where I say I'm this age and I have a son this age and a daughter this age. And then that's 3 numbers that change throughout the year, And so I have to mentally make those changes. And it's weird. I don't know. But I'm with you. The new materials is key for sure.
I mean, my goal is a year from now is 100% new. Now, they may not make it. That's a good goal to have.
That's a great goal.
Yeah. And again, I'm not talking about putting out a new hour, but a new maybe half hour. Mm-hmm. So we'll see.
That's excellent.
That's good. Don't make your audiences do math. I think that's the.
I know. I have a lot of math jokes for some reason.
Yeah. Do you ever sit there and look at the audience do math like 1? That's all I have in the audience. If it was plus 299, this place would be sold out.
Yes, I did.
Oh, that's great. For me, you talk about some of the events you do, and you kind of have a serious element or a fundraiser element, or just kind of what you call like turning the corner or whatever. I'm doing more of those now. I work with an agency called New Missions, and they build churches and hospitals in Haiti. For 30 years they've been there, and so it's a great organization. They do child sponsorship. And I work with Compassion as well as also child sponsorship. So now I'm trying to up my game with them. I want to do more and more events for them because I really love the way those feel, and I want to be good at it. And so one thing I learned this from another comic who does a lot of church events. He does a lot of Sunday mornings where he'll be asked to do some comedy and then kind of share a little bit. And not necessarily like an altar call full on thing, but just like I'm going to share a little bit. And I was so apprehensive of that, even though I had prepared sermons before. I had been in ministry staff, but just the combining of those two worlds. And this comedian named Michael Jr., who's very successful, and he does a lot of those, and he would really mentor me about that. And one time I talked to him for like 45 minutes, and he said, what are you doing when you do a Sunday morning? Because he wanted to recommend me some things, and he wanted to see kind of what my style was. So I told him how it normally would go, and I had done some and been successful at them. And he said, well, let me just tell you something I've learned from doing this, because it's most of what he does now. He says, the leash is a lot longer than you think. The audience is with you. And so when you take pauses, when you take them somewhere, even if you take them somewhere a little bit dark or somewhere super serious, like they're with you, even if you don't feel it. So you have more liberty. Uh-huh. And it did it. I think it really freed me up. I try to think of myself when I first started, I had a tendency to really speed up. And that's my real thing. If I'm in an audience that I feel nervous about, my act, I go a lot faster. That's what I tend to do, because I have a really bang bang show anyway. Set up punch tag, old traditional style. But now I find myself I want to take in this next year, and in the last half of this year, I really tried to be aware of it, is that space, you're building tension in a good way. It's not bad tension. I always thought the pauses were bad. Right. And they're not, they're neutral. It's what you're doing with them. So I've learned to just, even if I would not stop to take water sometimes. I would do an hour and not drink. Oh yeah. Water. By the end of the show, and I'm hearing it in the microphone, and I'm still like, if I stop to take a drink of water, these people are like, get off the stage. That's what I think they're thinking. I know. And now But I feel that. I feel that tension, but I think it's becoming a good tension now. It's like, well, I've got them. Let me take a breath here, and let me hope they're still with me. I'm going to be confident that they still are.
Right.
You know.
No, that's something I still have in the back of my head when I take it. Like I'll pick it up sometimes, and then I'll put it back down.
You just carry it around. It just needed to get out. It just
Yeah.
needed to move around the stage.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, but yeah, allowing space to happen. And that, I get really jealous sometimes when I watch new comics that are so comfortable.
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe you should pick up the pace a little bit.
Yeah.
But from the comedy club years, it was all bang, 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 and to the point to where the comment I most often got after the show was, how do you remember all that stuff?
Yeah.
And that wasn't really the comment. I took that as a compliment. Like, man, you just went from one thing to the next and next.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But what I should have heard was, man, you didn't give us time to think about anything, or you seemed rushed.
Yeah.
But they were just like, how do you remember all that stuff? You said a lot of things.
Yeah, I tend to speed up too, especially comedy clubs. If they're rowdy or anything, I think I can't give them a second or whatever. But sometimes I need to slow down because it's not that they're such a bad crowd. It just takes them a second to absorb the laughter. And you've always talked about if you start talking before they're done laughing, they're going to stop laughing because they're afraid they're going to miss something. It's like a conversation.
Yeah, I think the thing in clubs because I still do a couple things here and there, is I don't speed up. I just take out more words, like you were talking about earlier. Yeah, I have the liberty when I'm doing corporate events that they're with me for an hour because they have to be. They can't leave. And some of the stories get to be longer because that they want that journey of the story more. In a comedy club, they don't really need the journey of the story. They just need the beginning and the end. Yeah. And so I noticed even at your taping and when I did a set when Nate and Keith were down there. Yeah. I just took out a lot of words, and then luckily for me, it was right before December, and I'm like, oh, this is the way I should be doing these jokes anyway. Yeah. And then I'm doing the Christmas party stuff. So it was helpful just to self-edit, and it was almost a whole paragraph preface on some things that didn't need to be there. Right. But because it fit the corporate tone of what I was doing or the topic, but in a comedy club, it just didn't need to be there at all. I find, now we're getting off a separate subject, but writing, a lot of times you'll have a new joke, and I'll tell my friend, like you guys, and they're like, what's it about? And I'll just quickly give you a synopsis, and it's much tighter than the actual joke you wrote.
That should be the premise.
But because your friends aren't going to have, they don't want to hear this whole thing. Just tell me what it's about. And I'm like, that's how I should have wrote it. Yeah. Instead of all this other stuff.
No, that's true.
That's great. Yeah, no, it's true. Like Bill Gorgo, who I took a writing class from a competition that I was at. And one of the things he said always stuck with me, he would talk about good crowds and bad crowds. And he would say, you need both in your career because a good crowd will help you explore. It's true. But if you only have good crowds and your act gets loose because they're with me. I'm just going to tell this story a little bit longer. Or you find these weird tags that may work there, but may not work everywhere. And he said, you need bad crowds because they'll help you edit. Yeah. And so I think you need good and bad crowds. And so, that's really what you would hope for a career. You don't want just a career that's perfect. You want a significant career.
Significant. And you want to have some, without the sand, there's no smooth sandpapered edge, so you got to have those rough spots to kind of sand out and smooth out your good stuff. Yep. But if it's smooth all the time, it's just like crowds can sense too smooth as well. That's a whole other show. Yeah. Well, man, it sounds like on the positive side, there were changes in the past year that make us think differently about how we pursue comedy this year. And I think any year where if we sit down to this every year and we didn't learn anything last year, then we should stop altogether because we weren't paying attention probably. Yeah. But I learned from the stuff you guys shared. And I'm not going to give up sugar, but
well, it's only been 2 weeks, Rick. I'm not. Right. I'm no hero. Talk to me, or I'll have a Snickers in each hand.
Stop tugging on your shirt already.
I learned not to get a wife if you want to have a work-life balance.
It's easy to balance just you.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. Well, good stuff, fellas. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for listening to the School Last podcast. I'll go ahead and tell you real quickly right now. If you're not in on Club 52, take a look at that on the website. It's a 52-week email that you get that helps you one actionable tip on your business or your comedy or your performance of said comedy. And that's available to you if you sponsor through Patreon at just $7 a month or more. And part of that fun is I get to have hangouts on the computer. We're doing it through Zoom, which is like Google. We're doing that once a month. And those in the future, because it's on Zoom, will be recorded. So if you're on Patreon before and you couldn't make any of those hangouts, Those will be in the archive on Patreon for you going forward, just so you know that. But that's available to you, schooloflaughs.com/PATREON. I'm out of here. Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the School of Laughs podcast. If you'd like to hear more School of Laughs podcasts, you can find them on iTunes and Stitcher.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. For information on upcoming live and online classes, visit schooloflaughs.com. Until next time, stay tuned, stay focused, and stay funny.